So my question is, has this meeting, or has the topic of fair share come up in this meeting? Fair share in terms of having social services to be equitably distributed within New York City?
Yeah, there has been a constant undercurrent in a lot of the conversations we have in these issue panel meetings that took place, as well as our public input sessions. About making sure that resources are shared fairly. But I'll take it a step further, not only share fairly, but actually taking a different approach on how you distribute resources, because one can argue that we may not need to share fairly. It may need to be, overly proportionate to those who've been disproportionately underserved. So not making sure it's equal, but making sure those who have been disparate receive more services, more resources, more opportunity than historically given, or will be considered a level playing field. So going beyond that.
So what we observe in Harlem is we have 1.3% of New York City's population, but we have 14% of New York City's methadone distribution capacity and 10% of adult-only homeless shelters. So in a way, one can argue that East Harlem is overburdened by excessive amount of social services that other districts don't want. So my question is, are issues like that being addressed in this commission?
It could potentially could be. It was brought to the commission's attention when they actually had to meet in Harlem a month ago. What we're looking at is big structural changes. So it's not about particular policy or particular. We want to see what's something that can be broad-reaching, can change something structurally. So to take what's happening in East Harlem a step further, are we providing, and not so much if we're providing enough services for those who need methadone treatment, but are we doing, as the city, doing enough to make sure that we are providing not only those services, but supportive housing, job opportunities, making sure that they are not dependent on other, the homeless, being in the homeless shelter. Are we providing those services in the communities that they're coming from? Are we, is the services in the neighborhoods that they're coming from being impacted? Are they, so say if they come from Queens, where those things doesn't exist, do we need to make sure that they have those services there for those who need those treatments? And so Harlem is not burdened with, and receiving everyone around the city. Those questions we definitely are looking at, but beyond that is making sure that what are the things that led to folks to get involved in addiction abuse to begin with? Is there something that the city has done to support it, in what way? And it is something that can be done to address it in a real fundamental way. Is it in our education? Is it in our housing? We want to look a little deeper than that. That's the goal.
Our issue is, I feel like there needs to be a two-pronged approach. Certainly vulnerable people need to be helped, but vulnerable population has been shipped into East Harlem over the last few decades repeatedly. And that structure of over allocating social resources and shipping people that other districts don't want to see into East Harlem is a structural racism, and something is broken in the system to allow that to continue to happen, year after year, decade after decade.
Right. No, totally understand. And I think that's why we have this commission. And like I said, we may not be able to address all of it this time around, But what we want to do is lay out a roadmap of, what the city, state, and federal, because also there's a state component to this as well, that we as a city commission doesn't have control over. We can advocate, we can put forth some recommendations. But you're absolutely right, is that, assuming that because it's a Black and brown community, that they'll take all the meth clinics, they'll take all the all the social services programs, and we'll just send people from wherever in New York City to just a handful of specific zip codes. That's clearly structural racism in our face. And so, how we address that, how we actually address, what are the things that caused it to begin with, I think is where the commission wants to go. All right. Yes.
I wanted just to jump in here a moment. We have a question in the chat, and I'd love to look at that. But I wanted to say, as I'm a librarian, I'm not an MPA student, but I do work with some groups in my neighborhood, and for me, I don't know if this would be helpful to others, but it would be helpful to me to get a better sense of what can be addressed through the ballot measures and what is better left to legislation, and maybe like what it would look like for the kind of structural racism that Eva is speaking about, which occurs very much in the area I'm in as well, Flatbush and East Flatbush. What would work to in change? What could be changed in the charter to affect that?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out now.
Oh, okay.
Each charter revision commission struggles with it. They're formed because the last one the mayor formed was around participation, civic participation. And that's how we got the Civic Engagement Commission and Democracy NYC and reforms to community boards. And so, you put out this vision that you want to address a problem, and then, the commissioners, look to see what within the city charter can be done within that topic. There'll be some things, there'll be some ideas that require federal action. If folks are saying we want reparations, there may be some sort of federal, piece to that. There could be a New York piece to it as well. I'm not saying there's not, but there are certain, restrictions we have based on, federal and state laws. But the city charter, we're combing through it on a regular basis. We have really great attorneys that giving us guidance on the topics that are coming in, whether or not we can address it, how we can address it. And then what we want to do is actually go deeper than just kind of a policy, but really get to the roots of what led to this inequity, what leads to this injustice. So that's how we're approaching our work. And to Ali's question, how does the Racial Justice Commission collaborate with religious institutions to inflect debate over racialization and politics in NYC? Interesting question. We are starting to engage with religious institutions since I've been on board. We're going to do a series of meetings and roundtables with faith leaders across the board. Because we know that faith leaders have a really strong connection to their communities and see the injustices play out on a daily basis in the communities that they're serving their congregations in. So we definitely want to collaborate in a real way with faith leaders. And I have a lot of experience working with the faith community in my previous capacities in my career. So I definitely want to leverage that, my relationships there, and bring them over here.
I think the reliance on community board as a mechanism to improve racial justice, it's challenging. I sit in the community board, and that's because in wealthier neighborhoods, people have a lot more resources and time to kind of be civically engaged. Case in point, during the pandemic, when 300 homeless men were temporarily stationed in Upper West Side, they were able to raise $300,000 in 1 week to, file a lawsuit against the city, right? And then the FIDI area raised $1 million to prevent those men from being sent over there. And, in Harlem, over 2 decades, we probably raised maybe $10,000.
Yeah.
So
it's
unless we account for that, inability to perform civic engagement because people are worried about putting food on the table, it's difficult to, assume civic engagement will simply solve the problem.
Yeah, no, it's a very deep problem, because money is the root of everything, so the more resources you have, the more ability to whether engage, fight, embrace whatever the community decides. It's a lot easier for whatever, depending on their politics, to do so. I mean, on the flip side, you have like a neighborhood in Kensington, Brooklyn, that raised money to support, incoming shelters. They wanted to show a model, but they were able to do it by raising money as well. So the inequity is still there, whether the politics is favorable or unfavorable to those who are in in the disparate state. So and how do we level that playing field? That is a really profound question, and I'm not sure how we get there at this point, but as a challenge.
Has people considered zoning?
Hmm?
Has people considered zoning?
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah,
in other states, we look at other state law and other city law, there's just more an overall strategic plan of where certain social services are needed that are data driven instead of driven by how much money you have to file a lawsuit.
Right.
New York
Right.
City
No.
seems to not have that type of holistic plan.
No, it currently does not. And some people talked about zoning in many different ways about how we could actually develop, making sure that there are racial impact studies done to make sure that those who are of color are not being displaced or not being in harm's way of development, or to further the example about where we cite things, not overburden with a certain kind of services. And then just to expound, just to kind of shift gears a little bit, we were talking particularly about education. Certain school districts within New York City can raise the PTAs could raise a lot of money and provide additional resources. So the city gives every school roughly the same amount of money. And then you have PTAs of wealthier communities that can raise more to hire coaches, to hire, to bring in after school programs, to bring in science and lab and technology equipment where other schools do not have those resources to do that. And then that inequity gap continues to widen. And so it's like, is there room in that charter to address that, and so we're looking at that very closely as well, because the city can say we are giving everybody the same, we're race neutral, even though there's really no such thing as race neutral, but we can say all that. But then when you actually put if you say, okay, we're going to make everything the same, what you laid out as an example, people could leverage courts in the case of the PTA, they can leverage their own financial resources to bring in additional resources for their children, for the children's school. And so how do we address that? So that is a very profound question. So, all right. So I will continue with the presentation. If there's questions, I'll stop.
Great.
All right. We were at the different series. I'm going to go to the next page. We did a bunch of input sessions that I just talked about. We did Staten Island on July 29, Brooklyn on the 4th, Queens on the 5th of August, Manhattan on the 11th, Bronx on the 19th. And we did one in Lower Manhattan on the 9th of September. We also had 2 virtual sessions on 8, 23, and 26. And we did a youth one on the 10th, hearing the voices of young people. And so they were all very valuable and very engaging sessions that we participated in. The public really came out to give strong opinions about some of the vision they have around racial justice, and we're going to continue to do so more in the coming weeks. The timeline for the themes from the public engagement, and we talked about it a little bit just now. Access to capital, community power, health and mental health coordination and care, just procurement, providing low income housing, quality education for all people, community ownership and asset building, civic participation, measurement of disparate impact and remedies for disparities, and race neutral decision making. All that was various themes in the input that we received from the public. When we looked at zoning in a holistic way, we got to make sure that we account for, what resources are already in the community, how's it impacting the current impact, and, making sure that before another building goes up or we put in another program, do we have the infrastructure, the proper infrastructure for that community? And what is the racial impact on it as well? Is it an adverse impact? Is it a positive impact? Because a lot of times that doesn't take into account, but we know as persons of color that, a lot of decisions, whether good, bad, always affects community differently based on the color of their skin. Like I think we talked about this already. The next steps is that we are putting forth the preliminary report sometime at the end of next week. And then we'll do additional engagement sessions. We're going to have a final report and ballot proposals in mid to late December of this year. We're going to have our research and rationale and the report, a summary of our input, and then what's called a racial justice roadmap. So we talked about just now that we may not, we're not going to be able to put everything on the ballot to make New York City less racist. We want to take a huge chunk out of it, but we know there's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to be done after this commission is disbanded. And so we want to lay out a roadmap for not only the city, but for the state and federal government can do to make sure that New York City becomes a more racially just society. So I see a hand up from Professor Robinson. Yes, Professor.
Hi, Harold. How are you?
Well.
Good. I'm sorry to just be coming in, and so I may be asking a question that you maybe have already answered within the presentation. It's good to meet you, by the way. I just saw a couple of your last slides, and I think the work looks really great, and I think it's really important to do this kind of fact finding. And I guess my question is, who and what entities are the opponents of this? Because when I think about the roadmap and the blueprint for racial justice that has been done for a very long time.
Yeah.
You know, we've had successive movements. We've had first and second and third waves of feminism, of intersectional feminism, centering race. There's much work that has centered the intersectionality of the most marginalized people. And so it's always interesting to me when we do things like this. We do health commissions, and I'm a professor of community health here at MCNY. And it's always interesting to me when we put forth resources to do another study about what makes people healthy or unhealthy, as if we don't really know what those things are.
Right.
And so I guess my question is, as we move forward, and certainly there has been quite a bit of a bump in people's consciousness given our last year and the reckoning around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and countless others. What are the impediments and the roadblocks in New York City, and how do we get around those or dismantle those or move past those or work in concert with those so that we don't keep having to create more reports and more blueprints to do the work that we already know how to do?
That's a great question. I will say we don't have any visible roadblocks at this point, but we haven't come out with
other than racist people.
Yeah, besides the obvious racist people that exist, but I know your question is deeper than that. You know, it's until we actually come forth with proposals, I think that's when the opponents will come out. And you know, as you know, Professor, we have countless ideas that have come forth from, you know, council members and activists and, you know, folks who've been doing movement work over the years. And there's always been kind of an undercurrent of resistance that come from those who are in power.
Always.
You know, always. And status quo is always well-resourced. Status quo is always support racism, and status quo supports the continuation of those in power to hold on to power. And you know, whatever we propose will be uncomfortable for those in power, likely, because in order to really take a huge step towards a more racially just city, there's going to have to be some feelings hurt by those who currently hold power in the city, whether it be Wall Street, real estate industry, police, you know, you name it, you know.
And do we feel prepared? Does your commission feel prepared to combat or come up against, or, I mean, we'll have to acquiesce in some way because we won't get everything that we want, but we have to ask for everything that we want, and we have to demand for everything that we want.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I feel those who serve on the commission understand that, and I think they'll be totally comfortable with it. Beyond that, you know, I don't know. I never been afraid of a good fight, you know, for something right. You know, sometimes, you know, I go up against powers much bigger than me, but you know, for me, I never been afraid on that level. And a lot of the folks who working on this commission are not afraid, but you know, we're going to have a new mayor coming in. We're going to have a new city council body coming in, and we're going to have a governor's race
as well.
Hmm?
I said those give me concern as well.
Yeah, so
to be very honest with you,
yeah. So I think there's a lot of you know, and just amongst friends. I mean, this is at the end of de Blasio's term, so you know, we actually don't answer to him, and so he appoint the commission, but you know, our chair Jennifer Jones Austin made it very clear that this is independent.
And so you guys are cemented for the next administration to be present and
to at least through November. Yeah, we can function all the way through November 2022. What the new mayor can do, he can defund us, you know, whoever the new mayor is. You know, I don't want to make assumptions on this call. You know, so, you know, whoever comes in after de Blasio can, you know, take away our executive director, can take away my position, you know, but the commission themselves can still meet, can still, you know, make go to city clerk and make changes and things like that up to a certain point in time where you can no longer make changes to the ballot proposals. But whoever the mayor is won't be able to actually do anything to the commission besides take away, staff funding. So I don't know, I don't know what that, what that'll look like once we actually come out with something. But to your point, yes, there's going to be huge opposition, whatever we do. And if it's not a huge opposition, that means we didn't ask for something big enough, in my opinion.
Agreed. I always get concerned when, we put this kind of effort in, especially when I know that this work has already been done.
Mhm.
And, it's like, how do we create racial equity? How do we get more women in equal position? It's like, well, we could just hire them, or we could just do it. And I don't mean to oversimplify
Right.
what it takes to create racial justice, but in many instances, I feel that we put more effort into trying to figure out how to do it than doing it.
I 1000% agree.
I want to be really clear. I'm not diminishing any of the work that was done here. I think it's always necessary to take a fresh approach on the ways in which we do things. So this is with all due respect.
Oh yeah, no, and I don't even take it that way, because I actually look at this commission work as an opportunity, because I do agree with you. There's been task forces and bodies of people that said, let's examine how we could become less racist. This commission actually will put forth something that people can vote on that will change the fundamental laws of New York City. And so this is like a real tangible thing that we have to produce by law. And so, the question is, can we go far? Can we go deep? Can we do something that's really structurally big? That's really the question. We'll put forth something, but what that something is, my hope, a lot of us who are working on this hope that New Yorkers will embrace it and vote in favor of it whenever it comes out. We'll actually have a real a deep and lasting impact on our city, and to make it more racially equitable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see where I left off. I was going through steps, and so yeah, I kind of laid out exactly what the next steps were just in that conversation with Professor, and just give you some color behind the fact that the proposals will be voted on in November of 2022. And with the commission being independent of being influenced by this mayor or whoever the next mayor is until then, the goal is to actually put forth the ballot proposals now, before the end of this administration, but the commission will still exist in some sort of fashion moving forward. But we want, the commission wanted to make sure that the work can be completed with a professional staff, while it still have funding for the end of this end of this term. And so that's the practical reality. We're confident that whoever the next mayor is, that we'll be able to work with them and be able to continue to work, but we didn't want to make any assumptions either. So that's why we're moving in a very aggressive timeline.
So the ballot, will there be an opportunity to comment on the ballot proposals that are chosen, or does the public engagement sort of end with the just gathering like the raw data?
No, you on the final ballot proposal, we will hopefully lay something out for the public before it's submitted to the clerk's office at the end of December. But by time you actually see the final proposals, we wanted to make sure that we actually heard from everybody before then, and have enough information to put forth a proposal. But there might be some room to actually give a little bit of feedback. But the goal is that we have a set of proposals that folks can relate to, can see themselves in, and know that their voices were taken into account for it. So there's way, you know, where we could use help in is continue to inform more New Yorkers about the commission. We want feedback, comments, ideas, and so please follow us on our social media handles, which is on Twitter, Racial Justice NY on Twitter, or at Racial Justice NYC on Instagram and Facebook. You can watch all our proposals on not proposals, all our commission meetings and sessions on our YouTube channel, which is NYC Racial Justice Commission. And then our website is nyc.gov/racial justice. And so we are very reachable. We want to grow and get our word out because we want as much input as possible from all New Yorkers. I am very big on, you know, making sure that people know who we are, know that they can give input. And I've been very honest with folks. We may not accept every proposal that comes before us, likely not. But, you know, it's important to raise your voice because we want to build something. We want to make sure we get as much input as possible. So when we put the proposals in, that it can have as far-reaching effect as possible. So I see Joseph's hand up.
I just taking everything into account, it seems like you know, the political, social, and economic factors all like affect each other in one way. So like what Ava said about in East Harlem, the high concentration of methadone clinics and social services. I think, you know, like, I guess like just the start of it, you'd see in these neighborhoods, instead of putting them there, you mentioned, like, I'm not sure where funding comes from, but you mentioned that the commission was independent. So like if the resources do become available, you know, I guess an economic factor like that could like affect the social factors of it would be like, instead of putting, you know, for example, what we said, a methadone clinic, or even like a large store like a CVS or a Walgreens, put in a store that like would be owned by people that actually live in that community. You know, that's a way towards like opportunity, like economic independence.
Yeah,
absolutely. That was
absolutely.
just a point that I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, without me, you know, making any formal like statements of yes, we can do that, is obviously, you know, I'm not an attorney and I didn't read the charter from end to end. One of my goals in life is to read the charter end to end, but some of my colleagues did. But we are taking everything into account, like what are the powers within the city charter that we can do to actually, you know, have laws in place that can you know, create structures for people of color to have greater economic opportunity.
Right.
What are structures there to make sure that there's housing for people of color? What are, you know, what structures can be created to ensure that, you know, a community can be shielded from massive gentrification? So you know, those are like really big questions to answer, and you know, but we're confident that we can come up with some ideas that tackle some of those things. I'm not sure if there's anything else in the slides. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Harold, and thank everyone for coming to this. We are actually, the library is going to be holding 2 more roundtables on this topic, and we identified the next topics. We're still in discussion. So if anybody has ideas, please reach out to the library. It's just you probably have our email, but I'll put it in. But this was so helpful to get this overview and to have this discussion with all of you.
Well, thank you again. Thank you everyone who's on, and I know a couple of people who was on earlier, they left already, and I appreciate it, and look forward to coming back another time.
Great, great.
All right, take
All right.
care.
Care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.